I was 20 years old when I received permanent residency. It was the first week of October of 2014. And in that moment, I felt relieved. I felt great. However, 2 years prior, I'd been navigating my community college as an undocumented and DACA individual. So it was something along the lines of having to fundraise with my family and friends, working full-time with my DACA card in 2012, and just applying to scholarships that, didn't really apply to me. So it was a very intense time to be able to fund my education. And now that I was going to move on to finish my degree at Portland State University, I was kind of like, I don't know how I'm going to do that, because I'm in this moment where I'm not eligible for a lot of financial aid and all these things. So what was I going to do? So I ended up waiting. That's kind of like what it is for me. It's the waiting game. In between community college and Portland State, I moved to Portland for 2 reasons. The first reason was to establish myself here in the city, and the second one was to continue my immigration process. So I needed to get vaccinations, I needed to be interviewed by an immigration officer, and I needed to wait to receive my green card. But at the same time, my family and friends were all down in Roseburg. Roseburg's this small town of 20,000 people, about 180 miles south of downtown Portland. And it was an incredibly difficult time because Roseburg was this small town, predominantly white and rural, and I was out of place being an LA kid. But then on the flip side, here in Portland, I had no one. I was just by myself. I didn't have anybody, and I felt pretty scared. I felt alone. I didn't really know how to navigate this situation that I was in. So what I tended to do is on weekends, I would head down to Roseburg by Greyhound and visit my mom and friends. But what I ended up doing is I refrained from telling them how I was navigating this year. I was alone, I was scared, I was terrified. I just didn't know how I was going to navigate this. It was a constant loop of, what are you going to do? And even if you figure out how to do it, it's going to take forever for you to continue your educational journey. So during this time, my mother and I, we had gone through some pretty rough stuff. The passing of my stepfather, falling out with my sister. But through thick and thin, we always moved as a collective. We always moved together as a family. And I didn't want to share with her all of these things that was going through my head and I was navigating, because I didn't want to put extra pressure on her, and I didn't want her to feel like she didn't do a good job as a mom, which is the farthest thing from the truth, because her selflessness, her love, her ambition, and the future that she wanted for both me and my sister, I didn't want it to be in vain. And so when I would head down, it was another facade. It was another mask that I had to put on, just because I didn't want her and my friends to see what was truly happening. So during this time, I also decided to take one class. It was the fall of 2013. I had just graduated from community college and I moved up. And I didn't really know how to process all these conflicting emotions, these conflicting priorities, to be able to focus on just this one class I was taking. And to add injury to hurt, my professor, he was kind of a dick, and he really didn't understand. He had this mentality of, as long as you work hard enough and you pull your bootstraps up, you should be good. And I remember going to talk to him multiple times in his office, and him just kind of like pushing me to the side, not really not really trying to be empathetic and understand where I was coming from. So I ended up withdrawing from the class, and I felt like a failure. And I had a very difficult conversation with my mom about what that meant. Because for her, she's like, I don't want you to take another gap year, because I've heard that people don't go back. So as she would say in Spanish, no quiero que tomas otro año, porque mi miedo es que no vayas a regresar a la escuela. So she was like, I'm afraid I don't want you to take another gap year, because then you might not go back. And so I waited. And then I ended up receiving an appointment to do my biometrics, so that's like fingerprints, to be interviewed by an immigration officer. And without going into too much detail, it was very nerve-wracking and troublesome, because these individuals were pretty much examining my character and everything that I stood for, just so that they could provide me with a green card. But with all that being said, at that point, I passed all the tests and all that stuff, and I just had to wait. At this point, it was just a waiting game again. So in preparation, because I tend to think very 5 steps, 6 steps ahead. I know those folks that are undocumented or DACA probably have a similar experience. I applied for FAFSA regardless. I knew I was going to get flagged for verification, but I knew that my proof was going to arrive. I just didn't really know when it was going to. So on my FAFSA, I wrote 000000000. So it's like a Social Security one. And those that know, los que saben, saben. And of course, I was flagged for verification. They were just like, you need to show proof. And so this started a kind of back and forth between me and the financial aid office, because they were like, you need to show us proof. And I would kind of like push them away a little bit, give them a little bit like, hey, I'm having a little difficulty finding my green card, or I've been working full time and I don't really have the time to come physically to show you my green card. So that was kind of like the back and forth that we consistently had. So it's the beginning of fall 2014. Our classes are starting. And I'm getting a little bit more worried, because I'm like, it's been 3-4 months and I still haven't received it. I did all that stuff during the summer. So I'm waiting, I'm in class, I can't really concentrate, because once again, I don't know what I'm going to do, because the drop deadline for non-payment is coming up really quick. And if I'm unable to pay for it, I'm going to have to drop this quarter or have to wait another year just so that the financial aid stuff works pretty well. So I'm not really concentrating. I'm surrounded by a lot of people, but yet I still feel pretty alone. And it's just frustrating. It's a cycle of just frustration, anger, apathy to some degree, and I'm just waiting. It's once again, it's a waiting game. So it's the week after the classes started. I get this text from my mom. She's like, "Creo que ya llegó. I think it's here." So I'm in my math group theory class, algebraic operations and structures and stuff like that. And I'm just kind of like, oh, okay. So I don't care. You know, my professor's just been talking a mile a minute. My classmates are just kind of like dozing off. And I'm like 30 minutes into the class, and I'm like, I'm just going to get out of here. I need to go deal with this. I don't care. I'm not going to wait anymore. So I scurry out of the class, and at this point, I wait at the MAX station for about 10 minutes. Then I ride the train for about another 40, 50 minutes, and I take a small little nap just because I'm exhausted and tired. And then when I arrive at my stop, I finally climb my 20 to 25 degree inclined hill for about another 20, 25 minutes. So one-way trip, it's about an hour and a half all the way to Happy Valley, which is this kind of suburb 10 miles southeast of downtown Portland. My mom and I are subleasing a basement at this moment together. So I arrive at the house. I'm sweaty, I'm tired, but I'm also excited. My adrenaline is pumping. I go down into the basement, I walk in, and I see my mom just in the far corner. She's kind of half in, half out from the patio, and she's lighting up her smoke, and she kind of turns around, looks at me, and she's like, "It's right there. It's like on our coffee table." So I cautiously, kind of scared, adrenaline pumping, I walk up to the coffee table and I grab it. And I'm pretty sure it is because it says USCIS, which is the immigration office, whatever it's called. So I carefully open it. And even though I got approved, I'm still kind of thinking in the back of my head, what if they ended up actually rejecting me? And so I'm just going to receive a letter that says, "Hey, actually, psych. Okay, you actually don't get a green card." So I'm kind of like running scenarios in my head. I open it, and I slide the paper out, and there's my green card. This document that means so much to so many people in this country, I finally have it in my hand. So I look at my mom, and she asks me, "Is it the green card?" And I say, "Yes." And for those that, know my mom and I pretty well, we don't cry. We tend to repress our emotions a little bit. But in that moment, she came over and she gave me a hug, and we embraced for what felt like an eternity, but it was actually just a minute. So she's like, "All right, you finally got your green card." And then at that moment, I'm like, "Oh snap, I gotta go back to school because if not, I'm gonna miss one of my other classes, and I gotta go to the financial aid office because I know they're gonna keep pressing me about it." So I quickly hug my mom again, and as I'm heading out the door, she quickly says, "Ya llegó, al fin." It finally arrived. So at this point, I'm like like I said, it was an hour and a half to get there, but this time it doesn't feel that way, just because I'm so excited. But at this point, I'm also mentally preparing myself to kind of fight the next battle, my next opponent, as I would say, which is the financial aid office. Because since day one, they were pretty fucking mean. Like, I think the best way I could describe it is, if you remember Peanuts, the cartoons, like when the adults would speak, it was like, it was kind of like that, but just their tone was just a lot more meaner and aggressive. So that's exactly the mentality that I was like, I'm gonna get ready to fight these people, because I'm like, I need to get this verified real quick. So I'm on the train, and at this point I'm like, I'm not gonna wait anymore. I just need to go and do it. I arrived to the financial aid office, and they're there. I kid you not, I'm pretty sweaty at this point because I'm just like, I've been running back and forth. And I'm waiting in the line. And then I finally arrive to the financial aid office person, one of them. And I'm like, "Here's my green card. I need to submit it for verification." And the lady kind of just looks at me for a second. She's like, "Oh, okay, enter your student ID." I enter it, and she's like, "Okay, I'm just going to take your green card. I just need to make a quick copy of it, and then it'll take like a couple days for it to be verified." And in that moment, I was like, is that it? Is that completely it? In my head, I didn't say that out loud. If not, she would have been like, okay. So I'm about to head out because she gives me my green card, and I'm kind of like, ugh. The payment drop deadline is like next week. So if they're unable to verify it by then, I won't be able to get my financial aid to make sure I can continue classes. So I work up the courage, and I ask her pretty bluntly. I was like, so how long is this going to take? Do you think it'll be processed by next week? And she says, I can't give you a definite answer. However, it takes a couple days, so I really think you should be fine, but I can't make any promises. And that for me is more than enough. So I'm like, okay, bet, cool. So it's just a little bit more waiting. So on that day, a lot of things happened, but the two biggest things that happened, the first one was both my mother and I felt relieved. We felt relieved that now we both had, because she had gotten her green card before, that we both had our green cards, that we both had our new permanent status, and that we weren't going to be as much in fear of living as undocumented or DACA people. But the second thing that happened is that my educational journey got a little bit easier on that day. I still had to navigate 2 more years of working full-time, finessing, fundraising, all this stuff, but it got a little bit easier because there was no way I could have afforded to attend Portland State University, or any university for that matter. But it gave me a lot of hope and a lot of inspiration, because in that moment, for 16 years, I had been living and navigating a world that promised a lot, but didn't deliver. I lived for 16 years marginalized and oppressed. I felt a relief. I felt that for once in my life, I didn't have to be so overtly cautious of who I shared my immigration status with, and I felt empowered. I felt like I finally had a voice, even though in the past it didn't feel like I did. And at this point, I don't want others to go through the same bullshit that I had to endure, because that's not something that I would wish on anybody. And there are millions of undocumented DACA people in the United States that are navigating the same shit that I had to endure. So at this point, it's no more waiting. With that being said, thank you for listening to my story. And I do want to quickly say that in this moment, we need to continue our fight to abolish ICE, Black Lives Matter, and that just signing on to petitions or just donating money or voting is not enough. We need to organize with our community and be in solidarity for us to create a better future, not just for people like myself, but for other communities that are struggling through these horrific and pretty terrible times at the moment. So please remember that this is not just a story. This is my life, and I don't want others to just take it for a story, because there's a lot of impact here that lets me move in my life in ways that others are blind to or haven't heard. So once again, thank you so much, and goodbye.